Tonight, political stalemate as Tasmania's balance of power independents resist the Premier's demands. Also tonight, new protections for Australia's gig workers. Israel's Prime Minister rejects Hamas's ceasefire proposal. And Tasmania's Year 12 completion rate still lagging behind the rest of the country. Good evening, Guy Stayner with ABC News. Independent MP John Tucker has firmly rejected Premier Jeremy Rockliff's demand for a new, stricter agreement, priming the trigger for an early election. Both balance of power independents claim they are open to negotiating. What happens next will hinge on a meeting with the Premier tomorrow.
After almost a week of silence, it's now safe to say Independent MP John Tucker is not a fan of Premier Jeremy Rockliff's proposed new agreement.
Having our democratic rights taken away from us? No, I do not see that I will be doing that.
The Premier wants Mr Tucker and fellow Liberal-turned-independent Lara Alexander to agree not to vote for opposition motions, legislation and amendments. If not, he says all options are on the table, including an early election.
Look, I don't want an election, I want certainty. I want certainty and stability.
Lara Alexander has already rejected that demand.
I'm not prepared to be turned into Jeremy Rockliff's lapdog.
Mr Tucker says he wants the Premier to honour the will of Parliament. If he doesn't, he's threatened to move a no-confidence motion. And the threat of an early election hasn't deterred him.
I don't think that I am the reason that Tasmania will go into an election.
We've got quite a serious and farcical situation where independents are calling the shots.
The opposition has accused the government of trying to manufacture an excuse for an election.
Tasmanians have been in a period of instability for far too long now, and every minute the Premier spends worrying about the crossbench is a minute he's not spending doing his actual job.
People like certainty and stability. Tasmania's going well, they want to keep it going well. They're not interested in the distraction of politicians talking about themselves.
Mr Tucker and Ms Alexander have both said they're willing to negotiate a new agreement with the government, but they won't accept the Premier's key demand or reveal what they're willing to compromise on. The three are set to meet tomorrow. Something will have to give if Tasmanians are to avoid an early trip to the polls. Lucy MacDonald, ABC News.
New rights and protections are on the way for hundreds of thousands of workers through the biggest update to Australia's industrial laws in a decade. The Senate's passed a sweeping package of changes that'll safeguard conditions for casuals, truckies and low-paid rideshare drivers. But customers who order a lift or a meal are being warned they'll have to foot some of the bill through higher prices.
Most days, Utsav Batari spends 10 hours behind the wheel as a delivery driver. He's a gig worker, working long hours and often for not much pay.
There has been instances where I've worked 100 hours and barely made $1,000.
The amount of work he gets fluctuates, and how much he earns depends on which app he is working for.
We do not know how many hours we're going to work next week and how much we're going to make.
We've got workers in the gig economy that are literally rushing to their deaths.
Now, new laws are aiming to bring minimum standards to the gig economy.
Gig workers in Australia will now know that Australia is truly a country where you don't have to rely on tips to make ends meet.
The new laws apply to gig workers, like drivers with Uber and Menulog. For the first time, the Fair Work Commission will be able to set minimum standards, like a base rate of pay. That might mean delivery drivers get the same pay per minute, no matter which app they work for.
The Australian industrial relations system has modernised for a modern type of work.
Some of the major gig economy players backed the new laws, but acknowledge they'll lead to higher prices.
The exact price rises that come from the changes that will be announced today will ultimately be determined by the numbers that are set by the Fair Work Commission.
The laws passed the Senate this afternoon, wrapped in a bill with changes for casuals, truckies and a new right to disconnect, and backed by enough of the crossbench, but strongly opposed by the coalition.
If you thought as a business in Australia you were drowning under a deluge of red tape, the bad news is it is about to get worse.
Getting this tranche of legislation through the Senate is certainly a political win for the government. It's second in only a few days after the coalition folded and backed the Prime Minister's revised income tax cuts. Industrial relations can make for difficult politics, but Labor appears to have figured out how to negotiate with an often fractious Senate crossbench. There are new battles looming, however, in housing, education and a budget only a few months away. Tom Lowry, ABC News, Canberra.
Just 2 years after the Avebury nickel mine on Tasmania's west coast reopened, it's set to be mothballed once again. The mine near Zeehan employs about 200 people. Owner Mallee Resources went into administration in September, struggling to pay off a $50 million debt. It says falling nickel prices and more nickel coming out of Indonesia has made it hard to find a buyer, and it has no choice but to stop production. The Australian Workers' Union says the announcement leaves mine workers in a difficult position.
They are devastated by yesterday's announcement, absolutely blindsided, didn't see it coming at all, and are now very apprehensive about what their future looks like.
A ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas has been rejected by a defiant Benjamin Netanyahu. The Israeli Prime Minister forcefully dismissed Hamas's terms, vowing to fight until a complete victory has been achieved.
Hopes for an imminent humanitarian pause dashed.
I would like to emphasise again that there is no solution other than total victory.
An unwavering Benjamin Netanyahu calling Hamas's proposal for a truce delusional and restating only absolute defeat would ensure Israel's security.
We are on the path of total victory. Victory is within reach.
Hamas's proposal was in response to a ceasefire offer devised by mediators from Qatar, Egypt and the United States. But Israel said no to the terms.
Haven't seen in a long time. Yeah, a few weeks. Welcome.
Despite the rejection, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken remains hopeful.
While there are some clear non-starters in Hamas's response, we do think it creates space for agreement to be reached.
As talks stalled, bombing intensified, with Israel making a push into the southern tip of Gaza.
I'm especially alarmed by reports that the Israeli military intends to focus next on Rafah, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have been squeezed in a desperate search for safety.
The US was bracing for this truce setback, predicting that Israel may publicly denounce the mediation as part of its negotiating tactics. But the Americans were hoping to pull off a diplomatic success, because without a ceasefire in Gaza, risks remain that a wider conflict in this region will continue to escalate.
As in Iraq, where anger is growing. The United States launched a drone strike in Baghdad, killing a senior commander of an Iran-backed militia group. This, the Pentagon says, was in response to the deaths of 3 American soldiers in neighbouring Jordan. While the campaign of strikes seeks to deter, the threat of retaliation attacks is very real. John Lyons, ABC News, Jerusalem.
The family of missing Victorian woman Samantha Murphy has made a heart-wrenching plea in the hope of finding the 51-year-old mother alive. After 5 days of searching, police are yet to uncover any leads into her disappearance, but say there are no suspicious circumstances.
Distraught and in tears, Jess Murphy is living a nightmare.
Mum's a really strong woman and she's far too determined to give up this fight. I know she's out there somewhere, so if you could please continue to search for her, to give us something to work with, we'd really appreciate it.
Summoning all the courage she could muster, the eldest daughter of Ballarat East woman Samantha Murphy issued a plea for her return after going missing 5 days ago, speaking directly to her mother.
Mum, we love you so much and we miss you and we need you at home with us.
Samantha's husband Mick was by his daughter's side, struggling to comprehend what's happened to his wife.
People just don't vanish into thin air. Someone's got to know something, you know, whether it be any little thing that you might think's relevant, just call the police.
Police say the mother of three left her home just after 7 a.m. on Sunday for a run in the Wulwukarung Regional Park. Their search for Samantha has now expanded to the suburbs on the outskirts of the park and are looking for CCTV from Sunday morning.
Certainly if they find anything of interest on the footage, we'd like them to let police know that.
A routine runner in the area, the 51-year-old's disappearance is out of character, but police say no suspicious circumstances have been identified at this stage.
And we're keeping an open mind and considering all possibilities, and we're being extremely thorough and methodical with that investigation.
But potential leads have so far met dead ends. CCTV thought to be of Samantha running past a property has been discounted, as have items found in nearby bushland. Police say they're working through an enormous amount of information received from the public. There are still dozens of community members out helping in the search, vowing they won't stop until she's found.
We just need everyone to keep looking. It may be day 5, but Sam is the most strongest person, both mentally and physically.
Just keep going, keep encouraging each other. I know that it's really hard to lose hope at the minute, but I do believe that we will find her.
Hope her family is clinging on to.
Please come home soon. I can't wait to see you and to give you the biggest hug when I do.
Laura Mayers, ABC News, Ballarat.
The daughter of a 70-year-old Queensland woman who was fatally stabbed last week has joined the African community to appeal for peace. Vilene White's family say they don't want her death to be divisive.
The sign says it all. Two strangers brought together by tragedy.
Mum always said if I died, no one would care. And sorry, Mum, you sort of got a bit of a spotlight now. And you know what? If this is for one reason only, it's to pursue peace.
United in their calls for harmony.
The best way we can honour her legacy is for us to preach peace, unity, justice and accountability.
Vilene White's daughter stood side by side with an African community leader to condemn those targeting innocent people in the wake of her mother's death, allegedly at the hands of a teenage boy.
You're always going to have rogue kids. Doesn't matter what colour, they're always going to be troublemakers somewhere. You don't judge the whole community by a couple of bad apples.
Reports of vigilante attacks and racial abuse have increased in the days after the 70-year-old was allegedly stabbed at Redbank Plains.
Hate has no place here. Racism has no place here. Individuals make choices.
Mrs White's family say they want to see stronger government action to tackle youth crime. The pair is urging the community to channel any anger and grief into advocating for impactful and positive change.
This is a horrible situation. It's affected everybody involved. And please don't think my heart hasn't broken. But I'm on a mission to change things.
But the government is adamant it's focused on the problem.
Obviously, crime of any sort, including youth crime, is on the forefront of this government.
Talissa Saganto, ABC News.
Disability advocates have protested outside Victoria's Parliament House, calling for changes to the state's guardianship laws. They took aim at how the state's so-called gag laws prevent people under guardianship from speaking out about their experience. Guardianship orders allow a person or organisation to make decisions on behalf of someone who's been assessed as not having the capacity to do so themselves. The Disability Royal Commission also recommended changes to guardianship laws across the country.
It's no longer appropriate in this day and age. It's paternalistic, it's disempowering, and we think it's not consistent with human rights principles.
Coming up on 7:30, Sarah Ferguson speaks with Foreign Minister Penny Wong about the ongoing crisis in the Middle East.
Does the US and its allies, obviously including Australia, have any influence at all in how the Netanyahu government is conducting this war?
Well, what I can do is to use Australia's respected voice to advocate for peace.
Pakistan is temporarily suspending mobile services to strengthen security against rising militant attacks as voting begins in its general election. Tens of millions of residents will today choose a government amid soaring inflation and rising violence, with at least 30 people killed in bombings near electoral offices late yesterday. The previous Prime Minister, Imran Khan, is currently in jail on corruption charges, but he urged his supporters to wait outside polling booths until results are announced. The country is on high alert, with tens of thousands of troops and paramilitary soldiers on duty across the country. Prince William has spoken for the first time since his father was diagnosed with cancer, thanking the public for their support and well wishes. The heir to the throne returned to royal duties after time away to look after his wife and is preparing to take on an increased workload while the King undergoes treatment. The monarch has also issued his first statement since announcing his illness.
Prince William is back at work after 3 weeks away from the spotlight, facing the public for the first time since news of the King's cancer battle.
We really appreciate everyone's kind messages, thank you.
This charity gala for London's air ambulance was personal. The Prince used to be one of their pilots. He was all smiles as he rubbed shoulders with guests, including Hollywood star Tom Cruise. The heir to the throne acknowledged his family's difficult month. His wife is still recovering from abdominal surgery in January.
I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you also for the kind messages of support for Catherine and for my father, especially in recent days. It means a great deal to us all. It's fair to say the past few weeks have had a rather medical focus, so I thought I'd come to an air ambulance function to get away from it all.
Earlier in the day, the Prince handed out state honours at an investiture ceremony at Windsor Castle. With Catherine not expected back at work before Easter, the Prince and the Queen Consort will take on many of the King's public duties.
The months ahead will put pressure on the royal households as they try to fulfil all of their duties and maintain a strong public presence.
The King has made his first public statement since his cancer announcement, marking the 50th anniversary of independence in Grenada, one of the Commonwealth realms. I can only say how sorry I am that I cannot be with you in person to mark this momentous milestone. The monarch will now hold his weekly audience with the British Prime Minister over the phone.
I know the thoughts of the House and the country are with the King and his family. We wish His Majesty a speedy recovery and look forward to him resuming his public-facing duties in due course.
Meanwhile, Prince Harry is heading home to the US after spending a little more than 24 hours in England. He had a brief meeting with the King yesterday, but there was no royal reunion with his brother. Away from the public and press, the King is now recuperating from treatment at his Sandringham estate. Isabella Higgins, ABC News, London.
Back home, and a new rule aimed at reducing ambulance ramping at Tasmanian emergency departments will come into force by the end of next month. Under the new protocol, patients will have to be transferred from ambulances to emergency departments within an hour. The rule was a condition of the Tasmanian government's latest industrial agreement with paramedics. Tasmanian Health Minister Guy Stayner announced the new measure this morning, hours before he gave evidence to a parliamentary committee investigating ambulance ramping. As thousands of students return to school this week, Tasmania is continuing to lag other states on the proportion of students continuing to Year 12. In 2014, the Liberal state government promised to improve completion rates. It's now resisting calls to review the education system.
School's back in Tasmania, but not everyone who can go will go. Do you think you'll finish Year 12?
No, might try an apprenticeship. Yeah, keep studying, anything like that.
The Productivity Commission's new figures showing nearly half of the state's students aren't finishing Year 12. In 2022, 53% of Tasmanians in that Year 12 age bracket actually finished Year 12. Nationally, that figure was 76%. The number of Tasmanians that continued after Year 10 is the lowest of any state in the country at 71%. That's about 8% lower than the national retention rate. The Liberals promised to extend all public high schools to Year 12 before they were elected in 2014, with the aim of keeping more kids in classrooms.
My vision for this state of Tasmania is to lead the nation in education, and it starts today.
So why isn't it working? We asked now Premier Jeremy Rockliff.
Well, it is working, and it's working for rural and regional communities.
He says legal changes made by his government force kids who leave school early to go to work.
The great thing is that we have young people either at school, either in training or at work.
What I would like to see is more political will to implement change.
As of last year, all of Tasmania's public high schools now offer Year 11 and 12 curriculums. Before that, any student that wanted to get their Tasmanian Certificate of Education had to go to one of the 8 senior colleges found across the state. Education experts say the reasons behind Tasmania's consistently low Year 12 attainment rates are complex.
We actually need to dig a little bit deeper to understand the reasons behind that statistic. Young people in Tasmania do take a little bit longer to complete Year 12, or it might mean that rather than getting a TCE, there might be an education to do vocational education and training.
A challenge requiring further study. Clancy Barlin, ABC News.
Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister has urged Australia not to give up on his country during a historic address to federal parliament. James Marape is the first Pacific leader to speak to a joint sitting of parliament. But the visit comes against a backdrop of rising regional tension and looming political chaos in PNG. Here's Foreign Affairs reporter Stephen Jedgetts.
New honours for an old friend.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister of Papua New Guinea.
James Marape made history when he faced a packed lower house.
I welcome you to the House.
But he kept one eye on past legacies.
This is truly a historic moment for my country.
Almost 50 years ago, Australia shepherded PNG into independence. Now both countries are fashioning a framework for a new relationship.
Neighbours and mates, partners and equals.
But the backdrop is troubled. Just last month, Port Moresby was rocked by looting, and Australia is still plugging PNG's budget shortfalls.
I ask you, do not give up on Papua New Guinea. We have always bounced back from our low moments.
Last year, Australia and PNG signed a landmark security pact, but China is still pressing to strike its own policing agreement with Mr Marape's government, closely watched by Canberra.
These autocrats who use the carrot one day and the stick the next have a complete disregard for sovereignty.
January's unrest has also sapped Mr Marape's political strength, and he could face a no-confidence motion next week. The Prime Minister's confident he'll survive, but his opponents are unrelenting.
Politics in PNG, we say one day is a long time in politics.
The symbolism of today's address is clear. It's an offer that has previously been reserved for major powers like the United States and China, or to traditional friends like the United Kingdom and Canada. The Australian government is trying to say that it views Pacific nations as top-tier strategic partners in an increasingly perilous world. Facing an uncertain future,
our two countries are stuck with each other. We have no choice but to get along.
And facing it together. Stephen Jedgetts, ABC News, Canberra.
To finance, and the local share market rose again today while the Aussie dollar held steady. Here's Alan Kohler.
The share market has now gone up 11 of the past 14 trading sessions, so while the first 2 weeks of the year were rubbish for share traders, the next few weeks have been great. Today's standout was AGL Energy after announcing that profit had quadrupled to $400 million. Slightly awkward after Alan Fells accused the electricity industry of price gouging yesterday. Not us, said the company, and we spent $35 million helping vulnerable customers. Speaking of price gouging, the ABS has produced some cost of living indexes which showed that the hardest hit are those with a job. The cost of living for employees went up 6.9% last year, more than the inflation rate of 4.1% and much more than those who aren't working. And this chart shows where most of the problem is: housing. The average cost of housing for employees per week has increased 14.5% in 2 years. Meanwhile, China's statisticians announced today that consumer prices there fell by 0.8% in January, continuing 4 straight months of deflation. So their cost of living's fine, except, of course, too much deflation and you're in serious trouble. Chinese share market went up on the news following gains in New York and Tokyo. Oh, and one more thing about the matter of prices. Look at the cost blowout of the Reserve Bank's renovation of its headquarters in Martin Place, Sydney. From the initial estimate of $260 million to $500 and now $850 million. That's obviously why interest rates have gone up so much. That's got to stop. Iron ore and oil went up while copper and silver fell, and the Australian dollar is steady at just above 65 US cents. And that's finance.
A dominant display from all-rounder Marizanne Kapp has helped South Africa defeat Australia in a women's one-day international for the first time. Kapp made 75 as the tourists set the home team a rain-revised target of 234 at North Sydney Oval. Kapp then tore through the Australian top order and finished with 3 for 12. Australia was dismissed for 149, with South Africa winning by 84 runs. The Proteas trail 6 points to 4 in the multi-format series.
It was nice to observe from a fast bowler point of view, but I suppose from a team point of view, not so nice. I think, we all know what Kappy can do with the ball, and she used the conditions beautifully tonight and bowled really well.
Australian captain Mitch Marsh is expected to take part in tomorrow night's T20 clash against the West Indies in Hobart, despite testing positive to COVID-19. Marsh participated in training at Bellerive this morning ahead of the first of 3 T20 clashes, with the reigning Allan Border medalist still likely to take the field tomorrow night, albeit at a safe distance from his teammates. Tomorrow night's match is Australia's first T20 international on home soil since 2022. Wicketkeeper Matthew Wade says it's the perfect tune-up opportunity ahead of an away series in New Zealand and the World Cup later this year.
Yeah, continue to create bonds and try and win games leading into the World Cup. But yeah, we'll find out a lot about a few guys pushing, to make the 15. It's an exciting time.
Identical twins on the Sunshine Coast have amazed medical staff after giving birth within minutes and metres of each other. Nicole and Renee Bailey hadn't even planned to conceive at the same time, but ended up being due 2 weeks apart. Nicole was in labour for 2 days when her sister's waters broke early this morning. Renee didn't even make it to the ward, with baby Ruby arriving in the foyer at the Sunshine Coast University Hospital. Ruby's very close cousin, Xavier, was born soon after, just down the hall.
I was just about to get in the bath and I heard that someone had had a baby in the corridor, and I knew that Renee was coming, so I was like, what? Yeah, and you had your baby, then I had my baby 22 minutes later.
To the weather, and tonight's photo of sunrise from Lauderdale Beach was sent in by Sharon Woods. It was into the 20s for all the population centres today, 21 in Burnie and Devonport, 24 for Launceston, Hobart and the East Coast, and the state's top was 29 degrees in the Upper Derwent Valley. The satellite image shows mostly clear skies over Tasmania, but a front is approaching from the southwest. It's due to cross the state tomorrow afternoon, shifting our winds more southwesterly. Around the country tomorrow, showers in Brisbane, storms across the top end, but fine in the other capitals. Melbourne, cloudy and 22, Sydney 27, Perth 41. Back home, there'll be showers developing about the west and south, extending to the east in the evening, but it should remain fine elsewhere. There's a high chance of showers about the west tomorrow afternoon. Falls should only be a millimetre or two. 18 degrees in Strawn and Queenstown, 23 for Burnie, Devonport 26, Launceston up to 29 degrees after an overnight low of 11. Heading east, 24 in St Helens, 25 for Swansea and Campbelltown. And Hobart's heading for a partly cloudy day, rising from 13 degrees in the morning to a top of 23. Sunrise tomorrow will be at 6:21. On coastal waters, there'll be west to northwesterly winds of 15 to 20 knots, shifting southwesterly during the day and reaching up to 30 knots in most districts tomorrow night. There are strong wind warnings from Stanley the long way around to Low Rocky Point. Saturday will be fine, apart from light morning showers in the far northwest. Sunday also fine with light winds and afternoon sea breezes. And looking ahead, we should be nudging 30 degrees on Monday ahead of a late change on Tuesday. And if you think you have a photo that would look good on our weather segment, you can send it to us at weatherphotostas@your.abc.net.au. And that's it for this evening's program. Up next is Sarah Ferguson. See you tomorrow.